right, let's get started. Hi, everybody. It's Angie Rupert, founder of Rupert Law. We focus exclusively on E-2 and E-1 visas. So no matter what treaty country you're from or where you want to be, we can help. Thanks so much for joining us today. Super excited to talk with all of you about the E-2 visa and the E-1 if you have questions about the E-1. And of course, answer any and all questions that you might have. Now, we likely will not get to be not get to every single question, but hopefully we get to a lot of them. Some of these questions might be able to be answered with some of our other videos, so check those out as well. So with that, let's get started. Brandon has a bunch of questions. Let's pick one that we can answer quickly. And also that really is a common question that we get a lot. So it says in one of your other videos, it says that you can't work in a business until the visa is approved. How is this possible for setting everything up? Are you able to work in the business leading up? So you will have absolutely no work authorization until you get a, a visa that allows work authorization. In this case, it's going to be the E-2 visa, right? So if you are here on ESTA or a B1, B2, which is common, you can set things up. What does that mean? Like, or research for the E-2, right? Go around and look at a bunch of office space. Does any of this work? If you're buying a business, go and talk to the seller. Look at some of the documents, talk to your attorneys, maybe set up a bank account, things like that, right? But once you have employees and you either own the business, right? The business has exchanged hands, right? You purchased it and it's closed. It is now yours. Or if you're starting up a business, you have clients, you have an employee, you should not be in the United States anymore. Now, maybe you can run things remotely, at least in a pinch, or maybe you have US employees that can handle all of the work until you get the E-2 visa done. That really depends on the type of business, right? It's going to be very different if you own a coffee shop or if you have a marketing company, right? So kind of keep those things in mind. But you absolutely, once you have employees and you own a business that it has active clients, that's when you need to be out. Now, the good news is the way that we handle these things, we set them up in a very specific order. So you don't get those things until the very end. So yes, you will need to be outside of the United States if you're applying at the consulate, which is what we almost always recommend for our clients, between the time that you get those things, employees and revenues, and when you have the interview. The goal is to have that be the shortest amount of time possible. Maybe it'll be 8 weeks, maybe it'll be 12 weeks. Depends on where you apply, interview schedules, things like that. Unfortunately, that's something that neither you nor I have any control of. Only the consulates have control, right? Once the application is submitted, the consulates will let you know when you have your interview. But the goal is to have the least amount of time between an operational business and the visa as humanly possible. And you're going to have to leave your US employees in charge while you are out. Hopefully that answered that, which is great. Another question. Somebody was just denied for an E-2. You have not sufficiently demonstrated that the investment is substantial and that it is more than marginal, right? So those are the two most common reasons for denial. Not enough investment and that the business is marginal or that it will not be not marginal, which is a weird way of saying we just don't know that this business is going to produce enough revenue to support you, your family, and employees, right? That's what that means. So, yeah, I mean, the question then goes to, can I apply again? And the answer is yes, you can apply. I'm sure the officer told you that. They have to tell everyone that, even though it's not officially true. But yes, you can reapply. Some people do get approved on their second time. I have actually spoken with a former consular officer who told me that unofficially, if you've been denied twice, you're kind of out. It's kind of over. Okay. So you really want to make this second application count. So the other key about reapplying is that you've got to make a substantial change in the business, right? So if you were, let's just say, and I don't know, Harsh, I don't know exactly when all of this happened, right? I don't know the facts of your case, but if let's say that you went in on November 1st for an interview and you were denied, can you apply on December 1st? Probably not, because that's probably not enough time to make a substantial change in the business. So um, for yours, you could say, okay, Original investment was, I don't know what it was. Hopefully it was at least $100,000. But, I have increased my investment to this amount, and you're going to need to spend more money and show that. In addition, you're going to want to show that it's not marginal, meaning you need to increase your revenues. And I know that that's difficult while you're outside of the United States, right? But you've got to increase those revenues to show, listen, before we applied, maybe we only had $5,000 worth of revenue. In the last 90 days, we've made $30,000 worth of revenue. That, or something like that, right? So you need to make substantial changes between the first application and the second. I spoke to another former consulate officer who said that there's in some consulates, and I have no idea where you applied, but in some consulates, they have kind of an unwritten rule that if you apply within 6 months of the denial, they're kind of skeptical that you made additional or some substantial changes. So you really need to show that, right? You really need to make massive change in the two areas that they said you need to change. So something to consider there. Another question. Can you apply for an E-2 if you have an EB-2 rejection? You can, of course, you can always do that. Very difficult when you have a green card that has been denied to say, oh, trust me, I don't want a green card. So you do run the risk because an E-2 visa is a single intent visa, which has to say, hey, I'm not going to stay permanently. I'm always going to come back. I'm going to reapply. That's my intent, right? Single intent. So when you said, well, I've already applied for a green card and I got denied, so here I go. Sometimes that is a reason for denial on that E-2. They go, oh, we don't believe you. You already tried to file for a green card. So no, that's something that would be an additional risk that you would be taking on. Doesn't mean you can't get approved. You could, but I would say you really would need to address that in some way, if that makes sense. Hi, Angie. Is there an issue if I'm a dual citizen from Mexico and from France? France being available for E-2, but if I come to the US from Mexico and apply for the E-2, Mexico is also a treaty country. So you could apply with either. The issue is if you apply through USCIS. So here's an example, a real life example of something where you can still apply, but you have to go to the consulate. You can't go through USCIS. Okay. So let's just say you have two passports. One is Canada and one is South Africa. Okay. South Africa is not a treaty country. Canada is a treaty country. So let's say you enter the United States as a South African citizen, meaning you use your South African passport to enter the United States and you're entered as a B1, right? Going to be researching these businesses, talking with attorneys, talking with accountants, things like that. Then you come and you're here for 6 months or you're here for, 5 months and you say, okay, now I want to change status in the US. Can you do that? No, because you are technically in the United States as a South African citizen. But could you go to Canada and apply through the consulate in Canada? Yes, because you're not in the US. You would show your Canadian passport there. Of course, you have to disclose all passports that you have, but you can do it that way. So keep in mind, Mexico is a treaty country, and you can apply using your Mexican passport or your French passport. What you would want to do is you'll just need to go to the consulate, right? Not change status. Because however you're in the US, and if you decide to change status, it's got to be using the passport you used to enter the United States. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's see. Can my spouse work on the same E-2 business? Yes, your spouse can work in the E-2 business or not work at all or work anywhere that he or she could get a job. The spouse is going to be issued an E-2S, E-2 spouse. With that, once they are admitted to the United States as E-2S, at this point, they have work authorization, general work authorization incident to status, meaning as soon as you're admitted to that, you have work authorization and it won't be tied to a business, right? For the E-2 applicant, you do have work authorization, but it's tied to the business. You can only work for the business that is printed on your visa, okay? That's for the applicant. For the spouse, you can kind of work wherever you want or not work at all. or work for the E-2 business, or do whatever you want, or start your own business, right? As the spouse. So keep that in mind. Sometimes people use that as a strategy. That's one of the reasons that I usually do not recommend that a husband and wife both get the E-2. So someone needs to pick to be the E-2. The other person needs to be the E-2S. It just gives you so much more flexibility, right? In how things are working like that. So keep that in mind. Let's see. Can I invest, start up other businesses while working under the E-2 visa? I think I just answered that. I think. And the answer is, I mean, can you invest in something? Yes, but you can't work in it, right? And you'll have to show that you're not working in it. Sometimes that's very difficult to do. So think about it this way, right? If you bought Disney stock today, it's very clear you don't work at Disney, you just own stock. You're just an investor in Disney, right? So you can think about it that way. So your best friend owns this car wash, whatever, and you are an investor in that car wash. It has to be essentially the same. Hey, here, friend, here's $50,000. Let me know when we're available for dividend payments, and I will be happy to receive those. And that is your involvement, right? So can you do that? Yes. But can you work in another business? Absolutely not. And sometimes it's kind of a weird gray area. So you may really want to think about that before you commit to something like that, right? Because we just don't want them thinking that you're working because you don't have authorization to work in any other business except for the name of the business that is printed on the visa. Does that make sense? So it's really, really critical that you understand that. Okay. Let's see. Businesses that are heavily reliant on real estate, like mobile home parks, laundromats, car washes, apartment buildings, or storage, qualify for an E-2. And the answer is maybe. Really, you do have to show that you're going to employ people. First of all, for our clients, we always recommend that you have at least one part-time US employee on payroll at the time of application. Okay. And so if you can show that, that's fine. Car washes, I think for sure, right? Because a car wash, you're going to have lots of people working there. Keep in mind, whenever you have an employee in the United States, they must fill out a form I-9, right? The I-9 form is critical. That shows that they have authorization to work in the United States. So keep that in mind. So for a car wash, I think that would be easy because you're likely going to have multiple people working at a car wash. For those other things, you're going to have to show in the business plan, first of all, that you already have somebody on payroll and what it is that those people are doing, but also in the business plan that you're going to hire people over the years. What are they going to do? How much are you going to pay them? All of these types of things. Okay. So usually, now we do have a video on not apartment buildings per se, but real estate type businesses. So you may want to check that out, but you're definitely going to need employees. And so a lot of those can be done, but they've got to be big enough, right? So could you have a 50 unit apartment building that could qualify? Yeah. Can you have a duplex? No, that's not going to work because what do you need? That's not right. You need a handyman that comes around every 3 months for an afternoon to deal with, whatever. That's not enough. Okay. Also, it's got to be something that you are involved in. You need to be directing and developing this business. So there needs to be enough for you to do to kind of be in a CEO type position. Okay. So consider that. Let's see. What is the very first step if I am serious about getting an E-2 visa? Uh, so I always tell people there are 3 things that you have to do before we can help you, okay? And so these are the 3 things I would focus on. If you are like, I think I want this E-2 visa, these 3 things, if you can handle these things, that's when you need to call us and we can kind of walk you through the rest, right? So number 1 is you need to be sure that you want the E-2 visa, right? There are many, many visas out there for sure. And you need to make sure that the E-2 or the E-1, right? We haven't had any questions about the E-1, but if you're interested in an E-1, but that you want the E-2 visa. It's only you can decide that. I can't tell you what visa to get. I have no idea, right? But once you decide, yes, I want the E-2 visa for sure. Number 2, you have to make sure that you know what business you want to buy or start. Now, we can talk to you as far as a consultation goes about the multiple businesses and talk a little bit about that. But what you really need to do before you start on the journey is say, okay, this is the business that I've identified. Or at the very least, say, I've identified two businesses and now I'm going to narrow it down to one, that type of thing. So that's number two. Number three is identify your source of funds. Where are you going to get the money to invest? And make sure you have that investment within about 30 days. Okay. That's to say, sometimes people call and they go, oh, we're going to sell our house in France, whatever. And I said, great. It's not on the market yet. Okay. Okay. There are some things you can do before you get the source of funds, but if you want to be super efficient and move quickly, I would say just make sure that you have that within 30 days. So a better call would be, we just sold our house in France. It's a 30-day escrow. So we should have the funds by the end of the month kind of thing. Great. Now we're ready, right? You want the E-2, you know what business you want to buy or start. You're going to have your money within about 30 days. Okay. If you've got those three things, then we can kind of walk you through the rest. Um, can I acquire a distressed company that I'm currently co-founder of with intention to turn it into a profitable business? Well, anything that is distressed could be a problem, right? Because the business has to be not marginal. So keep that in mind. So you're going to have to show how, even though you owned this business prior, you're going to turn it around and be able to turn it around. Right. So something like that. Now, this would go for, let's just say, for someone else that you've located a business you really like, but it's not doing well. Right. So one of the things, and we've had that type of scenario before. So one of the things we say is, first of all, buy the assets, not the business. That's a whole other discussion, but that would be number one. But number two is a lot of your investment needs to be on marketing. Oh, I hired a salesperson. We revamp this, we revamp that. We're adding these services so they can see, like, well, okay, well, this business is not doing so great. So what are you going to do? Well, we've already done it. And we've done this and we've done that and we've done this other thing. And, if it's an operational business, then you can say, oh, well, 6 months ago, it was making whatever a month. We've doubled that in only 6 months, and I'm still not even there. Something like that, right? And also keep in mind that, so I would say that that would be the main thing, because I don't know that you would reacquire a business from yourself. You would just say, this is the E-2 business, and here it is, and here it is. But if it's not doing well, you're going to have to turn that around, right? Is it better to be a startup, or would going into a partner with a US citizen 50-50? So you can do whatever you want, right? So there is no ownership requirement other than you must own a minimum of 50%. If it is at all possible, we always recommend that you have a 51% ownership in the business as an E-2 investor. It makes the control aspect a little bit simpler, right? So if you can have 51 and your partner could have 49, that would be ideal. In no case ever could you have less than 50%. And keep in mind, if you're 50-50 today, or let's say you're 55-45 today, you get the E-2 visa, and 2 years from now, a third investor wants to come in and acquire 10%. They're going to have to only acquire 5% from you and 5% from the other, because you're always going to have 50% forever. Forever, you're going to have 50%. Okay. As long as you have the E-2 visa, it can never dip below 50%. So keep that in mind. You can have a US citizen as a partner. You don't have to do that. You could own it 100%. You could own it up to 50-50. Again, I'd prefer that you were 51 and your partner being 49%. Let's see. What else do we have here? Can you have multiple income streams coming into one LLC for each of a business that encompasses different leisure activities? Picker. You can, but I would definitely describe all of that in your business plan so they understand exactly what it is, right? Because once you renew and they're going to see your tax returns when you renew. Of course, that's part of the renewal process. And it's all got to be under the same title or the same entity, right? That you originally applied with. And they may want to know, how are you making all of this money? Oh, it's $100,000 here. It's $75,000 there. It's $200,000 from this. So that's a lot of that is describing it in the business plan, how it's all going to work. Should we register our business first and then reach out to you? You don't have to do that. No, we can definitely walk you through some of that process. We do not actually do the registration ourselves. We might be able to refer a corporate attorney to you, CPA. Also, you could find your own, because we are not corporate attorneys, right? We're immigration attorneys. I can tell you that from an immigration perspective, an LLC or C Corp could work. Either one of those can work. We've handled both of those entities, and there's no issue from an immigration perspective. Of course, there are liability issues, taxation issues, all types of things like that. So you should really talk to either a CPA or a corporate attorney in the state, not only where you're filing, but where you're going to be doing business as well. So kind of consider that as well. 51-49 split. Can two Canadians be two 50% owners? Yes, you can apply with two investors. You definitely can do that. And they must be 50-50, and you must both be showing control over the business. It's what they call negative control in FAM, right? So keep that in mind. So you can do it that way. But then you can never have another investor, because you must both retain control over the business and 50% ownership for as long as you both have the E-2. Now, if somebody decides, you know what, I'm not into this, whatever, move back to Canada, kind of gives up their E-2, then that person could have a lower percentage if you ever have another investor, but it would have to take out of the other person. But if you're both planning on moving to the US and investing in the same business, running the same business, it must be 50-50 ownership. And we definitely do have that situation in the past and currently, in fact. So, yeah, I think that is going to wrap for today. No E1 questions today, but I didn't expect a whole lot. Sometimes E1s have fewer questions, but if you have any other questions regarding the E-2 visa, obviously you can reach out at any time. We are always thrilled to speak with you. Or if you have any E1 questions, reach out. We can answer those E1 questions for you as well. So with that, thank you all so much for joining today. Really, really appreciate it. Please email us, arupert@rupertlawgroup.com. And we are happy to answer whatever questions, get a consultation on calendar, whatever you want to do. We'd be thrilled to do it. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.